What you just saw wasn't in the Middle East, nor was it in any war zone. But that's Europe. In 72 hours, we passed through a place where the police avoided entering after dark. Yet it was right in the heart of modern France, where politicians still talk about security, integration, and social stability. During the day, everything looks almost normal. Children are playing ball. The old man is sitting in front of the door, but as night falls, you'll realize the rules of the game here are no longer decided by the state. We didn't come here for thrills, but simply to understand what happened to our Europe when neighborhoods like this emerged, existed, and gradually became commonplace. There are no modern combat tools. There are no mighty armies, only abandoned buildings, walls covered in graffiti, piles of trash, a few motionless guards at the entrance, and the presence of the state disappeared very quickly. Places like this don't just form randomly. They are the result of decisions signed in very clean offices by people who will never have to live here. If you think this is just a strange neighborhood, the next 72 hours might make you think again. Marseille, a Mediterranean port city, is also the oldest city in France. From the very beginning, this place has been a center of trade where people meet and exchange. However, when looking at the statistics, another stark truth emerges. Marseille consistently ranks among the most dangerous cities in Europe. They even gave it the title, the most violent capital in Europe. And it was precisely that contrast that drew us to set foot in this place. We want to see firsthand what the media often only talks about half-heartedly. Upon arriving in Marseille, we realized this neighborhood is not poor in the conventional sense. Even here, there's money, a lot of money. It's just that the money doesn't go through banks, and it often comes with unwritten rules. A small sales point can turn over 15,000, 20,000 euros per day, which is equivalent to the revenue of a legitimate store in the city center. The difference lies in the fact that risk is insured by silence and the state's withdrawal. And if you're experienced, you'll probably understand the problem right away. When the government calls a place sensitive, it's usually when they've already accepted being on the outside, managing with numbers and periodic campaigns, and real life finds its own way to balance. Ironically, the system always claims to be in control, while the thing that is best controlled is the image. So, we decided to come here not to see, to look and then condemn anyone. But I just want to understand the mechanism better, where the money comes from, what maintains order, and why places like this don't just appear randomly. If you've ever been in business, you understand. When a market exists, it meets a need. The question is, whose need does it meet, and who pays the price? Before we delve deeper, I have a question for you. Do you think this is a policy failure, or the inevitable result of 3 decades of making the right choices? You don't need to rush to answer. Just keep it until the end. And if you appreciate this no-frills approach, subscribe to the channel to join us. We go slow, but we go deep. And now, the story of the first 24 hours, to see what order truly speaks when the lights go out. The first 24 hours in Marseille. If you think it's all chaos, you're mistaken. It's normal, just as normal as many other neighborhoods, except that this normalcy makes us feel uneasy. The market is bustling from early morning, with people exercising, strolling, and laughing happily. If you just glance at it, you'd think, just like any other labor camp in Europe. But as we stayed a little longer, we started to notice some out-of-sync details. Strangers are stared at for longer than is socially acceptable. At the entrances, a few people stood still, unhurried, not noisy like living landmarks. When a loud call rang out from afar, the entire area shifted in a matter of seconds. Doors closed, eyes turned, and people rearranged themselves. The police ran through quickly, efficiently, and without stopping. For a moment, everything ran smoothly. It's not the order of formal law, but the order of habit. In Europe, we're used to attributing everything to a crisis. But here, there's no crisis. There's a process. It's like a factory without a nameplate, still running smoothly because everyone knows their job. If you need a number for comparison, a small point of sale can turn over 15,000, 20,000 euros per day, roughly the revenue of a busy central cafe. The only difference is that this cash flow doesn't require a POS, doesn't need advertising, and risk insurance is purchased with silence. Does that sound familiar? In business, when a model is viable, it meets a real need. The problem is where that need comes from. There's a saying I heard from a man who's lived here long enough. In Marseille, the only constant is the promise of change. The saying is humorous, but also full of bitterness, because the speaker understands well. The stability of the system and the stability of life are not always the same. You might even be wondering yourself, where's the danger then? The danger lies in normalization. When children grow up considering being a watchman as a profession, when adults consider the warning call to be background noise, like church bells every Sunday, when the state is present enough to be counted, but not enough to stay, I'm not drawing conclusions for you. I'm only recounting the first 24 hours, where the danger didn't roar, but whispered very discreetly. Do you think this is a smart adaptation by the community, or a sign of a power vacuum that has existed for too long? If you appreciate this non-sensationalist storytelling, subscribe to the channel to continue following. We go with facts and experiences, not with the noise. Next, I will break down the shadow economy, where the money comes from, where it goes, and why it keeps this order in place. Before I actually set foot in Marseille, I thought I understood a little about this neighborhood. The active organizations, the many behaviors that occur openly, or how everything seemed out of control. But no, everything should start with a spreadsheet. And that's also why Marseille is known as the most dangerous city in Europe. Here, money speaks the clearest. A small sales point, yes, just 1 point, can turn over 15,000 to 20,000 euros per day. Let's put it into perspective. It's the revenue of a busy coffee shop in the city center, but open for 12 to 14 hours. No sign, no taxes, no POS. Why do I keep bringing up this detail? It's not by chance. Upon closer examination, I realized the operation was eerily familiar. Drive-through. Customers do not get out of their cars. Work shifts. Security guard. Delivery person. Cashier. Change shifts on time. Hierarchy. The lower levels bear the risk, while the higher levels manage the cash flow. If you've ever run a business, you'll realize this is a supply chain. Only the contract isn't signed on paper. You might be surprised to learn that the revenue here exceeds that of many legitimate stores in the shopping area. Profit margins are high because marketing costs are zero. Customers find us themselves. Operating costs are low because the risk is insured by the state's withdrawal. Does it sound bitter? In economics, when risk is transferred, profit increases. Here, the risk is transferred to the community. So, where does all that money go? Some of it flows out through informal channels. The rest stayed local, at restaurants, bakeries, convenience stores, places that look very ordinary. The informal economy is not separate from society. It blends into society, much like ink mixes with water. You don't see the boundary, but the color has changed. While the system always talks about elimination, the market only needs stability. And stability here doesn't mean peace, but predictability. When people know the rules, they follow them. That's why this order endures, not out of fear, but out of habit. So, if a model creates jobs, cash flow, and order, even if it's distorted, who is competing with whom? Legitimate businesses compete through licenses and taxes. Here, we compete with speed and discipline. Not good, not bad, just different. And the unusual lasts longer than we think. We don't face crime in a single sense. We are competing with an economy. An economy sprouts in a policy vacuum when laws exist on paper. But life needs solutions today. Do you think the solution lies in suppression or in making the economy competitive and legal? From jobs and income to dignity, your perspective is worth listening to. Leave a comment to discuss. No agreement needed. If you appreciate this data-driven and experience-based approach, subscribe to the channel to stay updated. We don't promise easy answers, just the right questions. Next, when money needs to be protected, violence becomes a tool, and that's when the rules of the game are revealed. Before spending 72 hours here, I always thought the violence in Marseille was mostly due to spontaneous anger, the overreaction of a few individuals. But that's not actually the case. In this neighborhood, violence isn't an emotion, it's a management tool. Just like interest rates in business, no one likes them, but everyone has to take them into account. What's being used isn't meant to scare. It's used to protect market share, recover debts, and send messages. Brief, clear, easy to understand for those in the know. You might not see it happening. And that's the key point. When a tool is effective, it doesn't need to be flashy. Let me help you visualize it better. In a European city, every 1% market share in a retail sector can determine the survival of an entire chain of stores. Here too, the only difference is that the market share boundaries are drawn by habit and silence. When boundaries are violated, adjustment costs appear quickly, accurately, and sufficiently to restore order. No sentimentality, not spontaneous. What outsiders find annoying is the community's reaction. When there's a change, everything shifts in seconds. Doors close, eyes turn away, paths open and close on their own. No meeting needed. No need to notify. The process has been memorized. In Europe, we are accustomed to believing that order requires law. Here, order needs to be predictable. There's a saying I heard, here, security is an add-on service. It sounds funny until you realize the meaning. Security is no longer a civil right, but an operating cost. When that cost is lower than the profit, the model continues to run. Facts are not easily quantifiable, because by their nature they are not meant to be quantified, but there are traces. A stable rhythm of life, uninterrupted cash flow, and conflicts handled quickly to avoid disruption. If you've ever managed a large organization, you'll recognize the familiar logic. It's just that the ethical standards are no longer the same. This is where you need to be clear-headed. When a tool persists, it's serving a function. The question isn't who is bad, but why this tool became necessary in the gap left by official laws. In fact, one resident even said bluntly, "Here, violence is like a tax. Everyone hates it, but everyone knows it exists, and everyone has factored it into the price." So, what about you? Do you think the solution lies in increasing repression, or in making legal order legitimate quickly enough, predictably enough, and present enough to replace it? Please share your perspective. Polite debate always starts with differences. If you find this analysis helpful in clearing the fog, subscribe to the channel to continue following. We don't sell emotions, we sell clarity. Next, when the tool is used for too long, the question is no longer who is using it, but where the state is and what it is doing. If you just look at the press release, you'd think everything is going in the right direction. A multi-billion euro campaign. Special forces, organized crime units, press conferences, announcing the situation is under control. On paper, the state is very present, enough logos, enough diagrams, enough timelines. But in real life, in this neighborhood, the sales point is still open, the guard is still in place, and the power vacuum is always filled faster than any plan that requires budget approval. That's not a technical failure. That's the difference in the game. A familiar comparison is this. In business, you can spend millions on restructuring, consulting, and internal communications. But if the decision-making chain is slower than the market pace, you still lose. It's the same here. The state plays the long game, while life needs answers today. When these two beats are out of sync, a gap appears, and emptiness, like water, always finds a way to flow. The figures sound very impressive. Increased budget, increased troop numbers, increased campaigns, but let's put it into perspective. A shift lasting a few hours versus a 24/7 operational order. A few weeks of peak season versus a habit formed over many years. When informal order is predictable, it prevails not because it's stronger, but because it's more in sync. The media often tells the story in a fast-paced news cycle. Arrests, seizures, illustrative images, but life unfolds to a different rhythm. Will it open tomorrow? Will the cash flow be interrupted? Will the rules change? The two stories rarely intersect. And so a very European feeling arose. We did everything according to procedure. It's just that the result didn't change. The state does not lose. They're just playing a different game. The games of budgets, terms, and indices. And the street game is about speed, presence, and predictability. When two games are different, the winner is not the bad guy, but the one who is more suited to the rules of the game. So the question isn't who is responsible, but rather what goals the state is optimizing for. Security as a public service universal, continuous, or security as a campaign periodic with media coverage? Which option would you choose if it meant paying with your taxes? I'm not drawing conclusions for you. I just put the pieces next to each other. What do you see in the picture? The failure of the policy? Or the unrecognized mismatch between governance and life? Next, leaving the system and the numbers behind, we will meet the people who live here, the silent hostages of a game they didn't set the rules for. If you want to know who really pays for everything we just talked about, the shadow economy, the informal order, the billion-euro campaigns, the answer isn't in the reports. It's here, in these small apartments where the windows are always half closed. I met a mother. She doesn't want to be on camera. She only said one sentence, very briefly. I told my child to go home before dark. Not advice. It's not discipline. That's a survival strategy. In Europe, we're used to thinking of risk as something that can be managed through insurance, through laws, through healthcare systems. Here, risk is managed by time. Where, when, and with whom. Like an unwritten curfew enforced by habit. I met another father. He works regularly, pays taxes regularly, and has lived here for over 30 years. He said, I'm not afraid for myself. I'm worried about the boy. His son grew up in the same building, saw the same faces, and learned the same rules. When I asked about the future, he laughed. A very European laugh. Polite, restrained, and avoiding a direct answer. The data says that areas like this account for a third of the city's population. But the data doesn't tell you about the feeling of being unable to move. It's not because of a lack of willpower, but because of a lack of options. Housing prices elsewhere, jobs tied to the area, elderly family members who can't move. Freedom of movement, a core European value, becomes a privilege here. There are losses that don't make the headlines. No need to go into detail. Just understand one thing. When order is maintained by habit, accidents become misfortunes. And, unfortunately, there is no collective responsibility. Ironically, the system is very good at naming the problem, but very bad at naming people. They don't live in a dangerous area. They live in a forgotten region. A region where security is a wish, and hope is measured by whether your child comes home safely tonight. And when a society accepts that there are families who have to live with higher risks, what have we traded off? Security as a universal right, or security as a result of geographical lottery? If you're a father, a grandfather, or just someone who's lived long enough to understand the value of a peaceful evening, what would you think? Please share your perspective. Conversations often start with difficult questions. If you find this approach more respectful of people than slogans, subscribe to the channel to stay updated. We tell stories slowly, so no one is left behind. And then, after 72 hours, the scariest thing wasn't what happened, but what became normal. After 72 hours here, I have to say something that will upset many people. The worst things aren't what you think. Not the sensational stories in the newspapers. It's not those dangerous images cut quickly to get views. Those things, at least they keep you on your guard. The worst part is how things become normal. In the morning, a child ran across the concrete courtyard, bouncing the ball like any other child in Europe. The problem is, he grew up in an environment where being a doorman at the entrance was considered a job, like being a supermarket security guard just without a uniform. Adults talk about strange noises like they're talking about the monsoon. Oh, it was a bit noisy last night. Done. Done. Life goes on. The most profound satire is, the system always promises to restore order, while the people just hope for peace tonight. One side sells futures with slogans. The other buys the present out of habit. And habits, like moss on ancient stones, cling more tenaciously than any speech. So the question for you is, when a neighborhood becomes accustomed to what the rest of Europe calls unacceptable, who is really changing the neighborhood? Or we ourselves because we've learned to look the other way? And after 72 hours, The story was no longer about how bad this place was, but rather, is this the future of many European cities? We just don't want to name it yet? 72 hours here didn't give me a simple answer. It only leaves difficult questions, and perhaps that's the most honest thing. This isn't a story about a bad neighborhood. It's not about concluding who's right and who's wrong. This is the story of how a society adapts when the system can't keep up with life, and the price ordinary families have to pay in silence. What do you think? Is this a policy failure, or the inevitable consequence of the choices Europe has made over decades? If you lived here, what would you do to protect your family? Please leave your perspective in the comments section. Frank and mutually respectful discussions are always more valuable than any slogan. If you appreciate the no frills, no sugarcoating, no preaching approach, subscribe to the channel to continue following in-depth analyses of European economics, politics, and society slower than breaking news, but closer to the truth. This video was created for the purpose of social analysis and independent journalism, not to attack any individual or community, not to promote illegal behavior, and not to encourage viewers to recreate the experiences described. All views expressed are intended to promote dialogue and understanding, not judgment. Thank you, and see you in the next video.